Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. If there is anything more daunting than interviewing a professional interviewer, it's interviewing an award-winning professional interviewer. Today's guest, Taffy Brodesser-Akner, is a staff writer on the New York Times, and she is a legend amongst journalists who often find themselves on the monosyllabic side of a celebrity. Her interview with Bradley Cooper, refusing to be interviewed, is a masterclass. I'll pop the link in the show notes. Her debut novel, Fleischman is in Trouble, was a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller. And then, never having written a screenplay before, she adapted it into a hit miniseries starring Claire Danes, for which she won an Emmy. Her new novel, Long Island Compromise, has just been bought by Apple TV too, and looks set to go exactly the same way. It follows 4 decades in the life of a wealthy Jewish Long Island family whose patriarch is kidnapped in 1980. The fallout is the story. Wealth, class, privilege, trauma, BDSM, controlling mothers, they all abound.
And in the locker room after the game is where everybody is talking and saying what they need to say. And I remember thinking, I have heard that women over 40 are invisible. I was wearing a lanyard with a placard. It was comically large. It said no locker room access. It said it in these huge letters. And I thought, you know what? I'm walking in. And I stayed there for 45 minutes.
I met Taffy in her publisher's office when she was visiting London to talk about her joy of turning 40 and realising that the thing she'd been taught to fear, middle age, was actually her ticket to freedom. The mystifying effect of money, the unlikely promise she's made her mum, and why her superpower is spotting a nose job. What's it like being on the other side?
The other side of an interview? You know, it's funny. I have this sense in the world, as any journalist does, that people sort of hate journalists, right?
Yeah.
My husband says, you know, journalism, the pay is terrible and the hours are horrific, but at least everyone hates us. And
is he a journalist too?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that way. I am very happy to be among my people. I really enjoy this. And then only later walk away thinking it is almost too late for me to figure out how to talk to people with a tape recorder on, because I am so used to a tape recorder being on, but I'm also so used to having control over what gets into the final product. Yeah. And now I do not.
It's like one of the interesting things, I think, though, but the difference between the podcast and interviewing for print. Mm-hmm. On the whole, I much prefer the podcast, but it means there's kind of nowhere to hide. I mean, for me, more than you. I mean, well, I'll tidy it up so that I'll be the one who waffles, not you, probably. So I sound less waffly. But, you know, it is what it is, ultimately. Right. You can cut bits out, but fundamentally, the conversation is the conversation, which is what I really love about the podcast. And whenever I write for print now, I mean, albeit not with the kind of length that you usually have, I kind of feel like by the time you've condensed what they've said into 1,500 or 2,000 words, you've necessarily misrepresented people almost, because you kind of go...
Right. And you yourself have decided what was important about that interview because you had questions. And even if you didn't and you just listened, you made decisions. I think that's why people like being on podcasts and people like being on the radio, is they have this idea that you can't manipulate their words. But I do understand the victimhood that goes along with being interviewed now. That's the answer to your question is I have seen a couple of times, not more than a couple. And it was usually somebody young who misrepresented the thing I said because they edited down what I said. The context was important. And I guess that's just the cost of doing business. I also don't think it's the end of the world. I guess because I feel so capable of representing myself. Yeah. And I think that most people who are more famous than I am do not. There's too much risk associated with a direct relationship with their audience. But I feel that I still have a direct relationship with the audience, despite how Twitter has fallen apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then maybe it's just the thing I'm holding on to because it was the most important part of my job for me.
Yeah, I guess maybe you understand the process. You've worked in the process.
Right.
So,
and I understand mistakes. And I also think I have a fundamental respect for journalists. I don't hate critics. I don't hate critics who give me bad reviews. I don't feel destroyed by bad reviews. I know where they exist in the ecosystem. I know, for anyone who has ever complained to me, I've never met anybody who says they read their reviews. And I've also never met anybody who can't quote back their reviews.
Yes, exactly.
But I also understand where in the ecosystem those reviews live, we no longer live in a time where you live and die by a review. And also that there is a circumstance in which you don't get reviewed, which is the worst possible thing that could happen.
Exactly.
It means, it is if somebody puts their thumb in the air and decides that you are not worth reviewing.
Yeah. So do you read your reviews?
Sure. I don't read them more than once. And
you're compulsively.
I don't, I scan them and I don't hold on to them in a way that I'm so happy, and I am shocked to find that I'm not.
How do you do that?
I think it's because I work with critics. I like critics. The critics at my newspaper are my favorite people in the world. They are the most interesting to talk to. They are the most erudite. They're the funniest. And I see that when they don't like something, it is not vitriol. There's this idea out in the world that critics just are looking to hate, but actually they are looking to love. And if somebody doesn't like my book, I also think that there's no such thing as a piece of art everybody loves that's good. Meaning, if it pleases everybody, what actually did it do? I remember when I was subject to Goodreads for the first time, right? Goodreads. So everyone says, don't look at your Goodreads. I looked at the Fleischman one a couple of times before it sort of became a graffiti board of things I don't understand. And I looked at the star rating, 3 something. And I thought, oh my gosh, why is it like, what does that mean that it's a 3 something? But then I looked up my favorite books. I looked up like my 5 favorite books, and they were all in the 3s. So what does that mean? To not have consensus is fine with me. To be a particular taste is fine with me. I don't think that the goal should be for things to be universally beloved. I think that the goal should be for them to find their audience.
Do you think that's a growing up thing? Do you think as you've got older, you're more relaxed about not being for all the people?
Yes, because I tried so hard when I was younger. I wanted to be liked by everybody. And there's a point at which you realize I am the kind of person that if I perceive that someone doesn't like me, I try harder. Even though perhaps if your goal is to be like, the right move is reticence, I will just bomb them with charisma. And it always makes them like me even less.
Yeah, they're a bit like, oh, she's too much.
I know, it's too much. And at some point, the horse is out of the barn. At some point, you have seen so many people who are liked get some sort of backlash that you also understand that there is a certain population of people who will dislike you simply because you are liked.
Yeah.
And sometimes, by the way, many, many people dislike me because I'm unlikable, I guess, or because I've said the wrong thing, or because I stand for something odious to them. I can't believe how long it took me to figure out and become comfortable with it. And I guess it is the gift of middle age. I can't believe how everybody taught me to be afraid of this period of life. I wish I could have started in it My whole life would have been so much better if I could have just started right now with perspective. I also write for a newspaper that everybody reads. I write for the New York Times Magazine, and I watch from my colleagues how not to take personally the fact that people have a personal response to the things that you write. Sometimes I learn from it, but most of the time, it's fine with me. I read this great book. One of my colleagues wrote it, A.O. Scott. Do you know who he is? He was the longtime film critic. Now he's a book critic at the paper. He wrote a book called Better Living Through Criticism. I read it and I give it to people who have just finished a book. You should read it. In its first pages, it explains that all art is derivative. Nothing is truly original because there hasn't been anything original since the Garden of Eden. Everything since then has been derivative of that. And when you read that, and when you read that the goal of a critic is to love something, it just lets you put your work not in a place of it was good or it was bad, but it was the thing I did at this moment. The thing you're asking, I also had to be good at the fact that the internet exists. I have been writing for a long time. If I look back at something I wrote 10 years ago, I can't make it better anymore.
Yeah.
And it exists.
It's a big learning though, isn't it? That kind of, I did once have a boss who said to me, basically, you can't change yesterday, you can only change tomorrow. And that sounds a bit like a Pinterest board, but at the same time, it's a really good point.
I mean, Pinterest boards are filled with really smart things. Yes. You know, like the only reason you put something on a pillow is because it lasts, right?
Yeah.
I agree with that. I had to learn from the younger generation to become comfortable with the fact that their lives are going to exist. At some point, there is going to have to be a sort of wholesale amnesty for yesterday, because we cannot hold against our children that their lives and their mistakes were recorded. And we have to learn from them that life is long. You've said stupid things. You have to move on, and you have to look for the corners of grace that you could find that told you it was okay to move on, to not live in the past, to not hate yourself, because I am the captain of hating myself for the thing that I said last night. I wake up in making snow angels in the shame of the joke I made last night, the thing I said that was funny but insensitive, the piece of gossip I passed along. And we have to figure out how to live today, even when yesterday exists. Forget about tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, for your Pinterest board, I would love to hear what we're supposed to do today with what happened last night.
I didn't hear you say anything inappropriate last night, but the night was young when
the night was young. But also the things that I turn to my husband in the morning and I say, can you believe I said that? And he'll say, no, that wasn't the terrible thing you said. or like, I think that it is just a condition. It is almost a hangover, non-alcoholic related, of having had a good time, of a self-consciousness born of somebody who usually has the opportunity to edit what she writes before it goes out.
Yeah.
Talking seems very dangerous to me. And I'm outgoing enough that it doesn't seem like it would, or I seem outgoing enough, but I prefer to curate.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I think that I'm called an introverted extrovert, though I think with a phrase like that, it means that none of it is real.
Yeah.
I do think I like to be alone a lot. My ideal time in recent history was maybe 2012 to 2019, when Twitter
when it used to be great.
When Twitter was great. And by the way, when it was great, we were like, this is terrible. Yeah. But it was great. And you could be alone in your room and you could opt into a social interaction with people who were kind of just like you. And
you could come back after a night out and go, I'll just see who's on Twitter and have a chat.
And have a chat and have a talk. And people were like you and they understood you. And sometimes you made real life friends over it. And it's gone. And I'll never understand if it's gone because it was destroyed by the way things get destroyed now, by tech and by
people,
trolls and the world at large, and the way it obliterated any sort of ability to have an open question and a good faith conversation. Or if once I wrote a novel, I was holding on to an identity I no longer had. Once I wrote a novel and made a TV show, I still felt like I was the same person.
No, I think it was the former.
I hope it was the former, because I would hate to think I did this to myself.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
I want to talk to you a bit about middle age, not just because it's the shift, but because it was obviously like one of the defining things about Fleischman. And it's actually really, really prominent in Long Island Compromise too. Yeah. Really, that moment, I guess, when you look up and you go, this isn't how it was meant to be. What was that like for you?
I don't know. I think I arrived at middle age.
Such a horrible phrase as well, isn't it?
It's who knows if it's even accurate. I might die today, and then this was.
Do not say that.
This was my late stage. This was my old age.
I was about to say something really inappropriate, like I might have your last interview, and that would be.
And it'll fade into history, but it'll be fine. It's only middle age if we make it to the end. Remember that.
Yeah.
So I say it with crossed fingers. I'm a writer, which means that it took me a long time before I knew that I was in the right career. I watched everybody around me become more successful and wealthier and what looked like a real life so long before I did that I arrived in middle age. I woke up on the day and realized I have been waiting to be 40 my whole life. I could dispense with the idea of a sort of like a sexiness, a hotness, an attractiveness, and no longer have to work so hard to show that I was not competing for those things.
That is such hard work, isn't it? That whole hot, sexy, attractive, popular.
Right.
Oh,
but I was working so hard to get those things that nobody told me. They were not an end game. They were a process, because I arrived at 40 to find that I was having career success, that I had a husband I still loved and liked. I had 2 children that I enjoyed who were not tiny anymore. And this thing that I had been taught to be afraid of was actually my freedom. I don't identify a missed youth. I don't look at people who are younger than I am and feel envious of them. I think that is a trap. And in fact, I think that's something we say to them to make them feel better about how hard things are for them right now. Like evolutionarily, they have to be more attractive because their lives and their senses of self are so messy. They're still this sort of wet clay. And if you arrive at 40 to find, I like who I am, or I like how it all went, or there was purpose. That's what I think. I don't think I arrived at 40 liking myself or who I am. I don't like to think in metrics like that. I suddenly realized that everything that happened to me was a gift that now fed into what I would do next. I have the saddest interactions with the people who were so attached to their good looks and their youth that their middle age is defined by regret and nostalgia and misery. I don't understand it. I feel like I'm so lucky to feel that I am just taking off. I don't know if that is a good answer, but it's an honest one.
No, it is. And I think it's kind of the same with school. It's like those people who had a great time at school and their school days were the best days of their life. I just think, thank God they were the worst.
Thank God they were the worst, because now is now. Talk about your pillow, your Pinterest pillow. Now is now. But also, like, people, I remember people telling me these are the best years of your life. And I would think, well, kill me now. Like, these are the best days. This is it. It's going to get worse from here. I was miserable. I had no friends in middle school. I was so needy and unpopular in high school. I had this residual sort of a listlessness and directionlessness. And again, I was watching everybody achieve goals early on, and I had to sort of stick to my guns, what I wanted to do, knowing that I might not be successful at it. And if I wasn't successful at it, I was going to learn too late to do anything else, or to do anything, or not anything else, but it would limit my options severely. And I would not know when to say uncle on this career if it wasn't working out for me. I would not want to be anywhere else, but I'm 48 years old. I'm so happy to be 48. Then again, I'm going to be 50 in 2 years. I now wonder if I will be even more delighted to be 50, or if I will say 40s were really great.
Well, I can only speak from my experience, but I'm 57, which just slightly pains me to say, because obviously the next big, thank you.
I wouldn't have guessed that at all. I thought maybe we were the same age.
Fantastic. I love you even more.
Thank you.
I mean, I think there's a thing that you were saying about kind of when you're a teenager or a kid and your elders say, oh, you'll grow into your looks, and you think, oh, fuck off. I don't want to grow into my looks. I want to be blonde and skinny and pretty.
And look at now.
And tan. I don't want to appreciate my looks in 20 years' time. But I do think that there is a benefit in that. Once you get here, you're like, well, that's great, because I never looked like that. And I've always looked like this, and I still look like this.
Right. And there's just like, there is only so much you could do with what you look like.
Yeah.
That you have to have some sort of acceptance for what you are. When I was in high school, I remember all of these girls came back from the summer between 11th and 12th grade with nose jobs. And first of all, everyone kept telling me that I was going to grow into my nose. Did no one tell them that? Or is it not true? And so everyone knows it, but I do, but I don't. And when did they all decide did they know they were like, is this the age that you do that? And
so is that 15?
I guess it was 15, which is a crazy time to endorse a girl's instinct to mutilate herself. My mother is very much about presentation and looks, would not let me get a nose job, told me not to get a nose job. And I came to see people, I can always spot a nose job, no matter how good it is. I came to see people with nose jobs as sort of leading with a neediness and a vanity that I would never want to be associated with. I don't want people to know that much about me just by looking at me.
Mm.
And you could say that they know plenty about me because of my nose and my face. But what they have is my ethnicity and my genetics. They do not have my orientation. My neediness can come out on its own. My vanity can come out on its own.
And then those nose job girls, for want of a better way of putting it, at 15, they get to 50 and they're still
adjusting. I don't think that they regret it. I don't think that they would endorse what I just said. I don't think they listen to podcasts. I think they mourn their prettier times. I think that they probably now all arrived one day at a dinner having gotten Botox, and someone said, oh my God, when did everyone know to get Botox?
Mm.
And
do you Botox?
No, I haven't. I did for a story for Elle magazine when I was 36, a story about whether or not Botox changes your mood.
Does it?
It does. It made me very disaffected when you can no longer match somebody's expression. Look, I just raised my eyebrows and you did too. Be like we mirror each other so that we could feel what each other are saying. And the minute you can't do that anymore, Do you get Botox?
No.
The minute you do that, and the minute we both decide not to match each other's expressions, like feel it right now. We're not raising our eyebrows.
You're trying to hold your face still.
Like I don't feel anything right now, but I do now.
Such a good point. Yeah.
So I did it that once. And when I did it, I would walk around saying to people, someone told me a sad story and I'd say, I know I don't seem empathetic, but that's because I just had Botox. I just want you to know that's very sad. And I remember other people saying to me, oh, I get Botox. And I said, but we're only 36. Like it was like the nose job thing. We're starting now. And it's something I can't keep up with. I guess I'm just not, I'm blessed to not be that vain, though I do have my vanities.
What are your vanities?
I color my hair. I can't bring myself, despite the time and expense. My mother has asked that her daughters not go gray while she is still alive. And, but I,
did she literally ask you that?
She not only literally asks us that, she continues to ask us that. Like she reminds us that if my roots are ever visible, she reminds me of the promise I made. She's astoundingly beautiful. And even when I was young, I remember that she was pregnant with my youngest sister and men were still looking at her. I always felt, I think that's the thing she's still so beautiful and people still remark on her beauty. And I think she cannot relate to the idea that not only am I not attached to any beauty, but I was never stopped in the street. She can't imagine that her daughters might not have been stopped in the street to be told how beautiful they were when she was told all the time. She thinks that is how life works, that people stop you in the street to tell you how beautiful.
What was the impact for you of growing up with a stunning mother?
I was so proud of how beautiful my mother is. I still am, because I think sometimes you look at, everyone has a friend who has a child that you look at and you're like, that child will one day be good looking.
Yeah. I have a friend who we used to, when we weren't in her presence a long time ago, we used to call her baby wardrobe head.
No.
That's terrible. And unfortunately, he didn't really grow out of it.
Really? I hope you edit this out or
not.
Or not. But also, if you told me that one of my children was not devastatingly handsome, I wouldn't even understand what you were talking about. So I think my mother would have the same sort of confusion about her daughters. My father is 6'3". My mother's husbands were handsome enough, but not devastating the way she is.
How many husbands did she have?
She had two. And she has 4 daughters. And we look a lot. None of us look like her. And it is this sort of tragedy of our lives that none of us look like our beautiful mother. But I mean, I think my sisters are the most beautiful and pleasing. I have 3 sisters and one is more pleasing to my face than the next. So I guess I don't even know what beauty means anymore. And I think they would say the same thing about me. So what does beauty mean if you didn't get the nose job?
I've just realized that at one point I was going to tell you that being 50 was great. So I'm just going to tell you, for me personally, I love being in my 50s more than being in my 40s.
Really? I remember I was doing a story about a football player and was given restricted access to the stadium. I wasn't allowed into the locker room. And in the locker room after the game is where everybody is talking and saying what they need to say. And I remember thinking, I have heard that women over 40 are invisible. I was wearing a lanyard with a placard. It was comically large. It said no locker room access. It said it in these huge letters. And I thought, you know what? I'm walking in. I do not know if it is my decision that being 40 gave me a cloak of invisibility, therefore the confidence, or if being 40 made me understand that some rules are dumb. I walked into this locker room and I stayed there for 45 minutes with a literal sign on me that said no locker room access. Nobody bothered me. People said hello to me. I was able to interview people. And I thought, I'm finally like, I was born for this. I was born to be this age. How angry I am that nobody told me that some people are actually born for their youth. Some people will be fine throughout. But a thing I make sure my children know is that it is possible that childhood just isn't for you.
Yeah.
And how would you know until you found out? Someone has to at least give you the possibility. Someone has to at least remarket life to you, that it might not be that these are the best years of your life. In fact, I hope they are not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I feel blessed that I didn't have friends at that age because I watched and I listened and I learned how to speak to myself in private so that I would one day be able to tell a story. It all worked out. I hope this doesn't sound too self-aggrandizing, but I think about this. I think about this a lot. I think about, the way we are told to dread menopause, the way we are told to be miserable, and that a little anonymity won't be wonderful. To be able to walk down a street and not be looked at, to not be surveyed, to know that you're being ignored, not because you're sexually unavailable, but because you get to just exist now. It's like this freedom to just live. You get to be a man. That's how I feel. Like you turn 40 and you get to live the way you've seen men living.
Exactly that. I mean, you just now said about anger. And one of the things that has really struck me, and it was obviously in the TV series particularly, but that scene, meme, message for life, if you like, of Claire Danes screaming. I mean, you're a genius apart from anything else. But yes, she was absolutely amazing. And I remember using that picture on a piece I wrote for my Shift Substack, a picture of her screaming. And oh my God, that piece went nuts. And I'm sure it was nothing to do with the piece.
Hey,
it was
you don't know.
Well, let's be real. And it was, what do you think is going on? Why do you think that Rachel's plight, that moment in particular resonated so much?
First of all, it was Claire Danes' performance. It was...
Yeah, she was incredible.
I mean, she did that in one take. I was there and we thought, well, she's just going to sort of ease into it. I mean, I remember she did that and members of the crew started crying. Like we all needed a few minutes afterward. We were not prepared. You write something on a page and the way the actors show up to do it and the way Claire showed up to do that, I think it defined the series in a huge way. I think that her moment there was about the realization that the life that you wanted for yourself, even if you got most of it, even if you got half of it, it is still impossible. But also, she had been fighting so hard against abandonment. She had built a life that she thought would be impervious to the abandonment of her youth, the unpopularity, the way her mother had died, the way her father had left, the way her grandmother didn't really love her. She had gotten married. She had built a career, and it wasn't enough to not render her alone in the end, which is what she didn't want, that there was nothing to do left but scream. And then she had a nervous break, and the scream opens up this door to a complete nervous collapse. That's what happens afterward. The screaming may be cathartic, but then she loses track of time. She's having a nervous breakdown. And I guess I'm a big fan of the nervous breakdown as a completely rational response.
Why do you think it resonated so hard with so many women, arguably middle-aged women?
I guess I can only say what it meant to me, which is that being a human is just kind of impossible. It's just too big. Sometimes I think on my best mentally healthy days, my life, being human feels small, and I feel one of 7 billion and not that significant and not that important. But sometimes just being a person feels too large and too big a responsibility. And I guess that's what it means to me.
I think to me, and I was seeing it at a point when I think I was past this point. For me, I think it was about all the things that you haven't said, all the things that you've sucked up,
Uh-huh.
all the ways that you've tried to fit in and do the thing, and how that hasn't.
It doesn't
You
work.
just can't do that a minute longer. But there's another moment, and I can't remember whether I'm remembering it from the TV or the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, both the books as well are about wealth and class and complacency. And Toby in Flashman is so complacent, isn't he? Well, I think I found him complacent. But there's a moment when they're talking about, I can't remember if they're talking about making friends, and I can't tell you about your own book. But when
Sure
he is basically saying, well, of course you make friends, you just walk into a room and you make friends. And she's just like looking at him like, what are you talking about? And I don't know whether that was coming from your heart, but it hit me right in the heart, because it was a bit like, I don't know how to make friends like that. The idea that you just walk into a room, walk up to someone and presto, you're friends. I was just like, and that the complacency of him just assuming that everybody just did that. I just wanted to hit him.
Toby and Rachel are define, perhaps the thing that brought them together is the thing that tore them apart, which is that he was economically, he had ease, both socially and economically, and she did not. And therefore, she could never understand his complacency, and he could never understand her desperation. And in the stresses of midlife, those are the things that tore them apart. When they were making decisions based on what they felt the needs of the family and themselves were, he felt that the need, sort of a normal distance from the culture they somehow found themselves in. And she felt that it was to go all in on those things, to make sure their children never experienced the desperation that she experienced. And who is to say which of them was correct? You know, he had never felt the desperation. How is he supposed to understand it? And she had never felt the complacency. How is she supposed to understand it? I think the lesson of Fleischman is that every point of view in it is defensible, depending on who's telling the story.
And that's the same with Long Island Compromise, isn't it? That kind of, well, yeah, I mean, it depends how you feel about the friendship.
I know.
That's the whole other, you have to read it. But that's the wealth, I mean, the immense wealth of the Fletchers, and that notion that you spell out, that if you come from that wealth, you can never not know the complacency or whatever of that cushion.
Right.
And if you don't come from it, even if you have it, you can never not know not having it.
Right.
Where do you stand in that?
I think I wrote the book to rationalize how many decisions I've made based on my attempts to transcend my economic situation. I don't think this book could have been written by somebody who came from wealth. I don't think they would even understand the question, though I understand that the thing I just said was very reductive. But I think I have to think of it that way, because again, if you divide the world into two kinds of people for the sake of Long Island Compromise, people who have felt the wolf at the door and did not know that their survival, their shelter, their food being taken care of was provided for and assured, and people who never even had to ask about those things. And I think no matter how much money you get, if you're in the first side of the divide, you'll never feel safe. And on the other side, you could lose your money and you'll never really understand how to be afraid for your survival, because it's so primal. It's something that had to get in on the ground floor of your development. That is this sort of mystifying effect of money, is that if you have it, you can never feel that desperation. And if you don't have it, you can never not feel that desperation, even if you get it. This follow-up is, well, doesn't everyone feel like they want more money? Or doesn't right? Like, how long is a piece of string, right? How much money is enough money? It doesn't matter for the sake of this argument. What matters is how you were raised to feel that your survival was precarious or your survival was assured. The book is told by a group of people whose survival was precarious about a group of people whose survival was assured.
And where do you stand now? Do you feel on solid ground?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that in a while. I've been only talking about it for so long, but I haven't asked myself how I feel. I feel technically that I am on the most solid version of ground I've had in my life yet, but I still feel a terror in me about the future and about the way the bottom could fall out. It doesn't help that the world feels very unstable now. It doesn't help. There's a sort of precipitous rise in anti-Semitism that harkens to more recent than anyone cares to remember history. But also, I think it's the thing that I just said, which is, I don't think I'll ever feel okay with it. And I guess I wrote the book to assuage my guilt over my obsessions.
So interesting, isn't it? Whenever I ask anybody about money, in fact, many women are very unenthusiastic about talking about money at all, whether it's what they've got, how they feel about it, what they were brought up.
Right.
And then every so often you hit someone like, say, Lisa Taddeo, who was very keen to talk about money.
Love her.
Yeah,
that's why she's great, because she will have a real conversation, right?
Yeah, she was very much about the inequalities between men and women. And actually, I hadn't been planning to ask you this, but I will now. I've thought of it. Have you, this is a kind of a weird way to ask you, have you felt like a woman in the way you've been treated in the industry when you've been working in TV? Or have you just
in television? I worked mostly for women and with women. 2 of our directors were men, but they were married to their co-directors who were women. The head of the network was a man, and the president of the network or the co-president, I think was her title, who was one of the executives in charge of my show, was a woman. It sort of gloriously didn't come up. I had never worked with or for women before. And it was glorious. I did not feel discriminated against. I also made a show in 2021 where the concerns for marginalized people were not women, and especially white women, the sort of center of power, and the concern for anyone marginalized were people of color. But I did not feel that way. I guess I did feel like a woman in that it was so delightful to be a woman among these women.
I want to talk to you for hours, but Lou is going to come and throw me out.
Sure.
So I'm going to quickly ask you the questions I always ask at the end. What is your emotional age?
48.
Why?
Because I feel a perspective that I did not have 10 years ago. And I feel less of a need to please people. I did not think that would ever happen to me.
Give us a book recommendation.
So I told you about A.O. Scott's book, Better Living Through Criticism. It is a great book for anybody writhing with insecurity because they have just taken a creative risk. I can't recommend it enough. I just read a great sort of crime thriller-y book called How Can I Help You by Laura Sims.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
It's really good. It's about a librarian with a past. And I really I really loved her first book.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and her second book, it just delighted me.
Check that out. I love a good write, especially a thriller, crime thriller.
Oh, wait, and I want to give one more recommendation. Alexis Solowski's Here in the Dark. It is the best book I've read in the last year. She's a colleague of mine at the Times. It is the story of a theater critic who finds herself embroiled in a crime conspiracy. It has the most interesting, funny, and outrageous voice that I have read in so long. And I loved it.
Oh, I hope it's published here.
It should be.
If not, it should be.
If not, it should be. Alexis Solowski is great.
I'm heading to Waterstones after this. What advice would you give younger women?
To not listen to other people tell you who you are or what you should be doing, because there are so many industries that benefit from that.
Yeah, she's been like, stop now. Who is your old bird role model or old broad role model in American speaking?
So she is not much older than I am. She is 2 years older than I am, but she is so much wiser than I am. Her name is Rabbi Sharon Brous, and she is this extraordinary rabbi based in Los Angeles who has sort of taken up leadership during a very, very rough time, moral leadership, and I just adore her. I also would like to say that the people I look up to so much, my producers on Fleischman, Sarah Timberman and Susanna Grant, who are marginally older than I am too. My older sister is marginally
older bird role models.
Yeah, marginally older, old broad role models. Yeah. But then I guess I will also say, despite my mother being younger than I am, I think that the way my mother has handled her life is so full of grace and wisdom. I couldn't do better.
What's your superpower?
I can tell when people are lying.
That's a good superpower for a journalist.
For a journalist. I think it's my only sort of journalist instinct, is that I know when somebody is lying to me. I think with it comes this other superpower, which is I don't hate them for it. My sympathy extends to someone who feels that they need to be dishonest. And I think in that way, you can figure out the secrets of the world.
Last one. How many fucks do you give?
Maybe 3. Maybe I give 3.
Happens.
You know what?
You
want to give 0, but then you're also selling a book. And you're like, wow, look at me sitting here on this podcast. I clearly have some fucks to give. Wherever you go, there you are, is how many fucks I have to give, which I think are 3.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.